So India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is back in New Delhi after a closely watched and significant two-nation tour. All eyes were on this trip of the Prime Minister, given what's been happening around in the world of late, especially with regards to US President Donald Trump's tariff. India in particular has been slapped with 50% tariff by Washington, 25% of which is a penalty for buying Russian oil. America under Trump is not happy with how India is standing its ground, not giving him the supposed credit for the India-Pakistan ceasefire, and as the New York Times reported the other day, for not nominating Trump for the Nobel Prize, which is one of the weird fetishes of the American president. Now, there is a lot of commentary and analysis out there about Prime Minister Modi's latest tour as we speak, but in this video, we'll just stick to the facts. The first stop of the Prime Minister's trip was Japan, where he was on a two-day tour. He met Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba for the 15th India-Japan Annual Summit. The two sides agreed to boost economic ties and cooperation with a special focus on technology. The biggest headline or number from this trip has been $68 billion. That's how much Tokyo has pledged to invest in private investments for India over the next 10 years or so. These investments span from semiconductors and rare earths to digital technology and clean energy. India's Ministry of External Affairs said New Delhi and Tokyo inked 21 pacts in total during the Prime Minister's visit. From there, Prime Minister Modi went to Tianjin, which is a major port city in China, for the all-important Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the SCO summit. There, all the focus, spotlight and headlines centered around three key world leaders, as a fourth one watched on. Hello and welcome, I am Shubham Chauhan. Let's get started. Russia, India, China, RIC. These three countries were the focus at the SCO summit in China's Tianjin. And since it was the first big summit involving these countries after the Trump tariffs. So you had Russian President Vladimir Putin, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Chinese President Xi Jinping. And these visuals that we are playing on the screen for you have become the photo of the day on the internet. Hugs, smiles, laughter, and bonhomie was on full display as the three world leaders interacted with each other. In fact, in addition to this particular visual of Prime Minister Modi and Putin walking past Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has also triggered a whole bunch of memes on the internet. Now, before we get into the outcomes from the SCO and what Prime Minister Modi discussed with the two leaders, here's a brief background on what this grouping is all about. So, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or SCO was formally created in 2001, primarily to counter US influence in this part of the world. SCO had 6 co-founders to begin with. And the two main countries were China and Russia. The other 4 were from Central Asia, that is Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Then in 2017, India and Pakistan became full members of the SCO. Iran joined in 2023 and Belarus joined in 2024. So that is 10 full members in all. These 10 members cover 40% of the world's population. There are other observer countries like Turkey as well, but the crux are the 10 nations that we just mentioned. This year's SCO presidency was with China, where Xi Jinping welcomed the member nations amid a turbulent time in international affairs. So first, let's look at what has come out of this particular SCO meeting, and that is the joint statement. From India's perspective, the big highlight in this joint statement is this: a clear collective condemnation of the Pahalgam terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir earlier this year. Remember, 26 innocent civilians were killed by Pakistan-backed terrorists in broad daylight on the 22nd of April. This is the first time that the SCO has condemned the attack in clear terms. The SCO statement calls for bringing those behind the terrorist attacks to justice, while also acknowledging the cross-border movement of terrorists. In fact, Prime Minister Modi too, speaking at the meet earlier, had called for no double standards in the fight against terrorism.
हाल ही में हमने पहलगाम में टेररिज्म का बहुत ही घिनौना रूप देखा। इस दुख की घड़ी में जो मित्र देश हमारे साथ खड़े रहे, मैं उनका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। यह हमला केवल भारत की अंतरात्मा पर ही आघात नहीं था, यह मानवता में विश्वास रखने वाले हर देश, हर व्यक्ति को खुली चुनौती थी। ऐसे में प्रश्न उठना स्वाभाविक है, क्या कुछ देशों द्वारा आतंकवाद का खुलेआम समर्थन हमें स्वीकार्य हो सकता है? एक्सेलेंसी, हमें स्पष्ट रूप से और एक स्वर में कहना होगा कि आतंकवाद पर कोई भी डबल स्टैंडर्ड स्वीकार्य नहीं हुई। हमें मिलकर आतंकवाद का हर रंग में, हर रूप में विरोध करना होगा। ये मानवता के प्रति हमारा दायित्व है।
So the cross-border reference in the final SCO joint statement is key from India's point of view. It's a reference to Pakistan and something that New Delhi has been saying for the longest time. In fact, in June this year, India had refused to sign the joint statement of the SCO defense ministers meet, precisely over these two aspects. A, because that statement did not condemn Pahalgam. B, over the language that was used to describe terrorism. Today's statement of the SCO, though, includes both. In fact, all 10-member countries, including Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, have signed the latest joint statement. Speaking of Pakistan, the SCO joint statement also condemned the terror attack in Khuzdar and the Jafar Express. In Khuzdar, 10 children died and 53 were injured in May 2025 after a suicide bomber drove an explosive-laden vehicle into a school bus. The other incident that was condemned by the SCO was the hijack of the Jafar Express earlier this year, where a train which was going from Quetta to Peshawar with 380 people on board was hijacked by the Baloch Liberation Army. Pakistani officials say at least 64 people were killed and 38 were injured. The other points from today's joint statement include opposing unilateral coercive measures, including those of an economic nature. These seem to be a veiled reference to Trump's tariffs and the sanctions by the West on Russia over the war in Ukraine. The statement opposed anything that went against the rules and principles of the WTO, damaging the interests of international security, negatively affect the global economy, undermine fair competition, and hinder international cooperation. That is what this SCO joint statement says. The statement also spoke on the situation in Gaza, where member nations reiterated their deep concern over the escalation of the conflict between Israel and Palestine and strongly condemned the actions that have led to a catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Lastly, the SCO condemned Israel and US over its recent strikes on Iran, where Tehran's nuclear facilities, including Fordo, was targeted and a number of Iranian senior officials were killed. The SCO said this was a gross violation of the principles and norms of international law and the UN Charter and an infringement on Iran's sovereignty. Now let's move on to the two bilateral meets of Prime Minister Modi, one with Russian President Vladimir Putin and the other with Chinese President Xi Jinping. First up, the Russian President. The much anticipated bilateral grabbed eyeballs even before it formally began, all thanks to this photo. Prime Minister Modi sitting with President Putin in the Russian President's armored limousine. The two leaders traveled together from the SCO summit meet to the venue of their bilateral meeting. Reports say Putin waited 10 minutes for Modi to join him in the car, and even after arriving at the bilateral meeting venue, the two leaders are believed to have spent 45 minutes in the car. The formal bilateral meeting lasted for over 1 hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India and Russia have always stood shoulder to shoulder in the most difficult situation, adding that their close cooperation is vital for global peace, stability and prosperity. Prime Minister Modi also called for an end to the war with Ukraine that has been going on since 2022.
यूक्रेन में चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय में हम लगातार चर्चा करते रहे हैं। हाल में किए गए शांति के सभी प्रयासों का हम स्वागत करते हैं। हम आशा करते हैं कि सभी पक्ष कंस्ट्रक्टिवली आगे बढ़ेंगे, संघर्ष को जल्द से जल्द खत्म करने और स्थायी शांति स्थापित करने का रास्ता खोजना होगा। यह पूरी मानवता की पुकार है।
Now, India's role in the Russia-Ukraine war has been a matter of great interest. India is among the very few countries in the world that has good ties with both Moscow and Kiev. New Delhi has repeatedly emphasized that this is not an era of war and that this war must end. In recent weeks, phone calls between New Delhi, Moscow and Kiev have gone up, signaling India's efforts. Prime Minister Modi spoke to Putin on the 8th of August, calling for an end to the war. Prime Minister Modi then spoke to Zelensky 3 days later with the same message. Following Vladimir Putin's meeting with Donald Trump in Alaska, the Russian president then briefed Prime Minister Modi on August 11th. On August 30th, Zelensky called Modi to express readiness to meet Putin and sought an immediate ceasefire. Now, it remains to be seen how things progress on that front, and that is something that will be watched very closely by the world. In his message, Prime Minister Modi said he was looking forward to Putin visiting India later this year. Now, the other meeting that was hyped up was that of Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. Remember, PM Modi visited China for the first time in 7 years. His meeting with Xi yesterday was the first since Operation Sindoor. In May, India had targeted 10 terrorist sites across Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan. This was followed by a 90-year conflict between New Delhi and Islamabad, which ended abruptly in a ceasefire first announced by the American president. In this war, China's support to Pakistan is pretty well known. And just within months of that operation, coupled with India's strained ties with Beijing post-2020 Galwan, have Modi and Xi met, potentially looking for a reset as far as India-China ties are concerned. Xi described India and China as the dragon and the elephant that must come together to promote peace, prosperity and multipolarity. PM Modi highlighted that border disengagement had created an atmosphere of peace and stability. He added that India-China ties should move forward on the principles of mutual trust, respect and sensitivity, saying that cooperation between India and China affects not only 2.8 billion people directly, but also global welfare. Both sides agreed to restore direct air connectivity, direct flights between India and China, strengthening people-to-people ties and business opportunities as well.
आपका हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। पिछले वर्ष कयान में हमारी बहुत ही सार्थक चर्चा हुई थी। हमारे संबंधों को एक सकारात्मक दिशा मिली। सीमा पर डिसएंगेजमेंट के बाद शांति और स्थिरता का माहौल बना हुआ है। हमारे स्पेशल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स के बीच बॉर्डर मैनेजमेंट के संबंध में सहमति बनी। कैलाश मानसरोवर यात्रा फिर से शुरू की। दोनों देशों के बीच डायरेक्ट फ्लाइट भी फिर से शुरू की जा रही है। हमारे सहयोग से दोनों देशों के 2.8 बिलियन लोगों के हित जुड़े हुए हैं। इससे पूरी मानवता के कल्याण का मार्ग भी प्रशस्त होगा। परस्पर विश्वास, सम्मान और संवेदनशीलता के आधार पर हम अपने संबंधों को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध हैं। एजेंसी चीन द्वारा SCO की सफल अध्यक्षता के लिए मैं आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। एक बार फिर चीन यात्रा के निमंत्रण के लिए और आज की हमारी बैठक के लिए आपका हार्दिक धन्यवाद।
Now, the biggest message from this Russia, India, China or RIC meet coming through is the show of strength and the optics, of course. Amid rocky ties with the US and an angry and a miffed Donald Trump, India, as far as India is concerned, New Delhi is not backing down. It has refused to toe the line of the Americans, like I said at the very beginning, and gone ahead to deepen ties with ally Russia and also look at a reset of ties as far as Beijing is concerned. And it's the latter that experts have cautioned on. After all, India-China ties haven't been the best. For an effective counter to the US, the India-Russia-China or RIC troika will have to do much more than just optics, with possibly Tianjin being the first step. That's all we have for this report. Thanks for watching.